want to tell you about the worst 9 seconds of my financial life. I'm standing in a grocery store line, carts already on the belt. Milk, eggs, a rotisserie chicken because I told myself I'd cook this week. The cashier scans everything, tells me the total, and I tap my card. Declined. I tap it again. Same result. And now there's a guy behind me with one of those little baskets, sighing, not even loud, just enough that I can hear it, and the cashier's looking at me with that face. You know the face. The I'm not judging you, but I am a little face. I paid with the emergency 20 I keep folded in my phone case. Left the chicken. Walked to my car and just sat there. Didn't cry. Just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, doing math in my head that I already knew the answer to. That was me. Not a guy in a thumbnail with a fake shocked face. Me. And if I told you that from that exact moment I built my way to $1 million, you'd probably think I'm exaggerating or that I got lucky or that there's some trick I'm about to sell you. There isn't. What I'm about to give you is the actual path, start to finish, the boring habit part and the part nobody talks about that's actually responsible for most of the number. No fluff. No, just believe in abundance. Stick with me to the end. Because the second half of this is the part that actually gets you from comfortable to $1 million, and almost nobody covers it. Before I get into the story, let me ask you something, and just answer honestly in your head. Do you check your bank balance and then immediately close the app, like not looking at the number makes it not real? Have you ever done math in the Uber home from a night out, trying to figure out if you can afford it, after you already spent the money? Do you feel like you're doing everything right, you have a job, you're not reckless, and you're still not moving anywhere? If even one of those hit close to home, stay with me, because later on I'm going to give you the exact formula that changed my numbers, one line. You'll want to write it down. I'm also going to tell you about the single dumbest financial decision I ever made, and then I'm going to tell you the one decision that actually turned a modest savings habit into a 7-figure number. That second part is what most people skip, and it's the difference between ending up comfortable and ending up at $1 million. But first, we need to talk about why that grocery store moment happened in the first place, because it wasn't bad luck. It was a pattern I didn't even know I was following. Growing up, money in my house was one of those topics that just hung in the air. Nobody sat me down and explained interest rates or credit scores. What I learned instead was watching. I watched my parents stress every January. I watched "we'll see" become the answer to almost everything I wanted. And somewhere in there, without anyone teaching me directly, I absorbed this idea. Money is something that happens to you. It's not something you steer. So when I got my first real paycheck, I did what felt natural. I spent like the money was the finish line, not the starting line. New shoes. Nights out because I earned it. A car I couldn't really afford, but that made me feel like I'd made it. And every single one of those purchases felt good for about 6 hours. Then the feeling would fade, and I'd need the next thing. Here's what I didn't understand back then, and I want you to actually sit with this sentence. I was treating money like a reward for the past, instead of a tool for the future. Say that back to yourself if you need to, because that one shift in how you see money is worth more than every budgeting app combined. For years, I told myself the story that I just didn't make enough, that the problem was my income. And look, income matters. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. But let me tell you about 2 people I actually know, because this is where it gets interesting. I know someone, I'll call him D, who makes genuinely good money, comfortably in the 6 figures. Nice apartment, nice car, the whole visual package of doing well. And I know someone else, I'll call her M, who makes maybe half of what D makes. Unglamorous job, modest apartment, drives a car older than some of you watching this. D has almost nothing saved. If his income stopped tomorrow, he told me once, and this stuck with me, he'd be in real trouble in about 6 weeks. M has over $140,000 quietly sitting in investment accounts. Same rough decade of working, half the income of D. Same starting point, completely different outcome. The difference wasn't luck. It wasn't a secret stock tip. It was one number that M understood and D never thought about, the gap. Not what you earn, the space between what comes in and what goes out. That gap is the first number that has to exist before anything else in this story works. You can be a phenomenal earner and still be financially fragile if that gap stays at zero. And you can have a completely average income and build real wealth if you protect that gap like it's sacred. But I want to be honest with you, the gap alone is not what gets you to 1,000,000. Hold on to that thought because I'm coming back to it. I didn't understand any of this at the grocery store that day. I understood it about 8 months later, after I hit a bottom that was honestly more embarrassing than the declined card. I need to tell you the dumbest thing I ever did with money, because I think it'll help you more than any spreadsheet. About 2 months after the grocery store thing, I got a small tax refund. Not huge, a few $100s. And instead of doing anything remotely sensible with it, I told myself a story. The story was, I deserve this, I've been stressed, one nice thing won't hurt. So I bought a jacket. A genuinely nice jacket, the kind that makes you stand up a little straighter when you put it on. I wore that jacket exactly 3 times. 3 times. And every single time I wore it, some small, quiet part of my brain, the part I'd been ignoring, whispered, you know you needed that money. I wasn't relaxing in that jacket. I was performing okayness while secretly panicking underneath it. And here's the belief I had to dig up and actually look at. Somewhere along the way, I'd started thinking that being careful with money made me small, boring, less fun. Like the people who tracked every dollar were somehow missing out on life, and the people who spent freely were the ones actually living. That belief cost me years. Because here's the truth nobody tells you. The anxiety of not having a plan is 1,000 times heavier than the discipline of having one. I traded a few hours of fun for months of that quiet 2 a.m. stomach drop feeling over and over on repeat for years. That's not living freely. That's the opposite of freedom. Real freedom was M, sitting on her savings. Able to say no to a bad job or a bad relationship because money wasn't holding her hostage. The day I actually understood that, not just heard it, understood it, was the day everything started working. Not because I suddenly had more money, because I finally saw money for what it actually is. Not a reward, not a personality trait, not a measure of how fun you are. A tool, neutral. What you build with it is on you. Okay, let's get into exactly what I built, starting with the foundation, because you need this piece before the bigger piece makes any sense. Here's the one-line formula. You'll want to remember this. Income minus expenses equals savings plus investments. That's it. Every single dollar that comes in either becomes an expense or it becomes part of that gap we talked about. And that gap splits into 2 jobs. Savings, which is your safety net, and investing, which is your growth engine. Here's the mistake almost everyone makes with this formula, including me for years. They try to fix it from the expense side only. Cut the coffee, cancel one subscription, skip a night out. And look, trimming expenses matters, I'm not dismissing it. But you cannot save your way to $1,000,000 on a fixed income alone. There's a floor. Rent has a floor. Food has a floor. And even if you're disciplined enough to invest every spare dollar for 30 years, on an average income, you land somewhere in the low hundreds of thousands, not 1,000,000. I want to say that clearly because most videos won't. Saving alone gets you comfortable. It does not, by itself, get you to 7 figures on a normal timeline. Something else has to happen, and that something else is what changed everything for me. Once I had my gap automated, once saving and investing were no longer something I had to think about, I had spare mental energy for the first time in years. And I used it to ask a different question. Not, how do I spend less? I already had that handled. The question was, how do I own something instead of just earning a paycheck from it? Here's what that actually looked like. I was decent at organizing chaos, spreadsheets, systems, that kind of thing. Nothing rare. But I noticed a friend who ran a small business was drowning in exactly that kind of mess. Invoicing, scheduling, basic operations. So I didn't ask for a job. I asked for something different. I told her, let me clean this up for you on the side, and if it actually saves you money or grows your revenue, give me a small percentage instead of an hourly rate. She said yes immediately, because there was no downside for her. If it didn't work, she owed me nothing. It worked, not overnight, over about 1.5 years, but because I'd taken a percentage instead of a fee, my income from that one relationship kept growing as her business grew without me needing to work more hours. That's the part that changes the math entirely. A paycheck caps out, ownership doesn't. From there, I did the same thing twice more, small, unglamorous businesses, people who were good at their craft but bad at the operational side. Each time, a small equity stake instead of a flat rate. None of these were dramatic wins on their own, but combined, they eventually did something my savings account, on its own, could never have done. They created a second and third stream of income that grew on their own, completely separate from trading my hours for dollars. At the same time, the automated investing kept running quietly in the background, the whole time, never paused, never touched. So there were two engines running at once. One was slow and boring and absolutely reliable, the index fund, growing through compounding, decade after decade. The other was slower to start but had no ceiling, small ownership stakes in real, growing things. That combination, not one or the other, is what actually closes the gap between comfortable and a million. The saving habit gets you to a strong, stable base. The ownership piece is what makes the number stop being linear and start compounding on itself. I want to bring up M one more time because there's a detail I left out earlier on purpose. M did the saving and investing side flawlessly, 12 straight years of the same boring automatic transfer, never interrupted. That got her to over $140,000. Genuinely impressive, genuinely something to respect. But when I asked her, a few years after that, whether she thought she'd ever hit 7 figures on the same path, she paused and said probably not for another 20 years, maybe more. That's the honest math of saving alone. It's not a criticism of her, it's just the ceiling of that one engine by itself. The people I've seen actually cross into 7 figures faster than that almost always had a second engine running, a business they had equity in, real estate they owned instead of rented, or ownership in something that grew independent of their hours. Not necessarily something dramatic, or something they started from a genius idea. Often it looked exactly like what I did, taking a skill that already existed and trading it for a piece of something instead of a flat check. Let me pull this whole thing together, because I promised you something you could actually use, not just a story. 1. Stop measuring wealth by what you earn. Measure it by the gap between what you earn and what you spend. That gap is the foundation everything else is built on. 2. Automate that gap immediately, so the decision only has to be made once, not every single payday. 3, and this is the piece that actually gets you from comfortable to a million. Once the foundation is running on its own, look for ways to trade a skill you already have for ownership, not just income. A percentage instead of a paycheck. Equity instead of an hourly rate. That's the engine with no ceiling. 4, run both engines at the same time. The saving and investing habit is slow and steady, and it never stops. The ownership piece is what turns that steady number into something that compounds on itself. And 5, and this is the one that took me the longest to learn, money isn't a reward for the past, and it isn't a personality trait. It's neutral. It's a tool. The story you tell yourself about what spending, saving, or owning means about who you are will shape your whole financial life more than any spreadsheet will. That grocery store moment, the declined card, the guy sighing behind me, I actually think about it sometimes with something close to gratitude now. Not because it felt good. It didn't. But because it was the moment the old pattern finally broke, loud enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. And it's the reason I ended up building 2 engines instead of just one. If any part of this felt like I was describing your own 9 seconds, send this to the one person you know is quietly going through their own version of it, not to embarrass them. Because sometimes the only thing that changes someone's trajectory is one person caring enough to say, hey, here's what actually worked for me. And if you want the exact structure of those ownership deals, how I actually approached people, what I asked for, and what I'd say no to now that I know better, that's coming next. I'm going to break it down line by line, no vague advice, just the actual steps. I'll see you there.